and I did some research. And I looked at three writers: Hemingway, who was born in 1899, Fitzgerald, born in 1896, and John Steinbeck, born in 1902. Three guys about the same age. Now let's start with Ernest Hemingway. He was born in Oak Park, Illinois. He was the son of a doctor, pretty well-to-do family. Didn't always have a lot of money, but they lived in a nice house in a nice neighborhood. Spent a lot of time with his father, hunting and fishing up in the northern lakes of Michigan. Went to Paris. After high school, he became a reporter for a couple of papers, one in Kansas and one in Toronto. Then he went over to Paris, and he was writing all this time. He wrote short stories about Upper Michigan. The main character was named Nick Adams, very much like his trips with his father. Then he went over to Paris, and he wrote his first novel, The Sun Also Rises, sort of about a group of people in his set who had gone down to Pamplona to watch the bullfights. Then he went down to Africa, did a lot of hunting down there. He wrote The Snows of Kilimanjaro, the famous short story. He was in the Revolutionary War in Spain, and he wrote For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is about a soldier in Spain falling in love with one of the people who were in the mountains with him. It's a beautiful love story. And then towards the end of his life, he moved to Cuba. And he lived in Cuba for about 10 years and did a great deal of marlin fishing, almost every day on a ship called the Pilar, a boat. And he wrote The Old Man and the Sea. So there's a very close correlation there. I thought, oh, this is very nice. So then I quickly moved on to F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now Fitzgerald came from the Midwest. And then he went to Princeton University. And he fell in with a group of eggheads in Princeton, Edmund Wilson and some other big thinker types. But he seemed to become enamored with people that lived extravagantly. He hadn't come from a family that lived extravagantly, but he was very interested in them. And when he started to write, his stories were mostly about what the very rich were doing, and a relationship frequently to a guy who was coming from the Midwest and trying to integrate into their life. Very much as those of you who've seen The Great Gatsby, the character Nick there. Nick has come from the Midwest, lives on the estate. Gatsby's come from the Midwest, lives in a big house. Daisy's across the water. And there's a great milieu of, there's nothing but problems the whole time. The same thing with his other novels. He goes and lives in Paris, he goes down to the Riviera, comes back to the United States, goes out to Hollywood to try to make money writing. His wife's in a sanitarium. He's having to support the payments on her, as well as his extravagant lifestyle. And the whole thing is a mess. He ends up always borrowing money from his literary agent and from his literary editor, Maxwell Perkins. And he ends up busted, drunk, and dead by the age of 44 in Hollywood. So is there a correlation there? I think it's pretty close correlation between a guy who was unable to break out of that part of his life. Now, let's think about John Steinbeck. Now, Steinbeck I knew the least about. I chose him because he's in the same age group and American writer. Steinbeck was born about 1902 in Salinas, California, Monterey County, and he lived there most of his life. He came from a pretty well-to-do family. His father was a treasurer of the county, and he didn't have a lot of money, but they were pretty solid. And he got interested in what the poor people were up to. I think he had a few summer jobs working out in the fields. And then he went to Stanford, but he dropped out and went to work in the fields of, because it was all farm country out there in California at the time. And when he started to write, stories about the poor in California and how they were treated, but how they had to live, what their conditions were, and also he had very good stories to go along with it. He wrote of Mice and Men and The Grapes of Wrath, just to sort of remind you of two of them. He wrote about Cannery Row. He became quite famous. These were popular books. And they were popular everywhere, but in California, especially in Monterey County, where they banned the books from being in the local library or in any of the schools or in any of the bookstores, because they didn't like the way that they were being depicted to the rest of the world. So eventually Steinbeck left California, moved east, and he wrote East of Eden, which was also about characters in California. He became friends with Lyndon Johnson, who was a liberal. Steinbeck was very liberal. This writing was liberal in the sense that it was dealing with the poor. And get this, you see, you get Fitzgerald writing about just the rich, Steinbeck's writing about just the poor, and Hemingway's writing about just pretty much what he's doing, what he's up to. Steinbeck became a friend of Lyndon Johnson, went in the White House and met him and this and that. But then Johnson used him. He sent him to Vietnam to look at our troops over there. He went to Vietnam, said that he thought the Vietnam War was good because he was a friend of Johnson, etc. And when he came back, he lost all of his liberal friends. Not only did he lose his California friends, but he lost his liberal friends because they didn't like the Vietnam War that Johnson was backing. So part of what I want to say to you here is you can see Fitzgerald wrote about people really not like him. Steinbeck wrote about people really not like him. Hemingway wrote about people very much like him. And they all had their own problems in the audience at home, but they continued to write about what they knew. Now, for instance, Hemingway's parents, apparently, what I read in my research, thought that his books were filthy and wouldn't read them. Steinbeck, as I told you, they more or less booted him out of California for what he was writing. And Fitzgerald, who was from Minnesota, to my knowledge, never went back. Was always in either Paris or Hollywood. So it was fascinating to bring all this together. And I wanted to come today and share it with you.